The sun hung merciless in the cloudless sky, a burning eye that gazed down upon the dusty trail leading into Willow Creek. The heat shimmered off the hard-packed earth, creating ghostly mirages that danced and disappeared like broken promises. It was the kind of day that made even the lizards seek shade, the kind that reminded folks why some called this land God's own furnace. Clara stumbled along the rutted road, her boots worn thin enough to feel every sharp stone beneath. Her dress, once a respectable blue calico, now hung in tatters, bleached by sun and torn by thorns. The hem was caked with dust from a journey that had lasted longer than she cared to remember. Her lips were cracked, her throat parched, and her pride, well, her pride was about the only thing she had left intact. She'd knocked on 3 doors already that morning. Mrs. Henderson had given her a crust of stale bread and a pitying look that cut deeper than any harsh word. Old Samuel at the general store had offered her water from the horse trough, which she'd accepted with what dignity she could muster. The third house, she didn't even want to think about the third house, where the woman had threatened to set the dogs on her if she didn't move along. Clara paused at the edge of town, shading her eyes to look down the long road that led to the Bar Ranch. Everyone in Willow Creek knew about James Hollis and his spread 5,000 acres of prime grazing land, hundreds of head of cattle, and a 2-story house that was the finest for 50 miles in any direction. They also knew he was a fair man who paid his hands well and didn't cheat at cards. But fair didn't always mean soft, and generous didn't always mean foolish. She'd heard the whispers in town. James Hollis had lost his wife 3 winters past, leaving him with a little girl and a fortune that made him the target of every matchmaking mother and ambitious widow in the territory. He'd turned them all away, polite but firm, retreating behind the walls of his prosperity like a man defending a fortress. Clara looked down at herself at the dirt under her fingernails, the sunburn on her arms, the patches on her dress that spoke of poverty and desperation. What would a man like that want with a woman like her? Nothing, most likely. But she was past the point of pride now. All she needed was a meal and a place to lay her head for one night. Tomorrow she could move on, maybe find work in the next town, though Lord knew she'd been telling herself that same lie for weeks now. The walk to the Bar Ranch took the better part of an hour. By the time Clara reached the carved wooden arch that marked the entrance to the property, her legs were trembling and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. She gripped the fence post, fighting off a wave of dizziness. Just a little further. Just to the house. The main house rose up before her like something out of a dream. White painted boards, real glass windows, and a wraparound porch that promised shade and comfort. Roses climbed a trellis on one side, their blooms defiant against the harsh climate. It was the kind of home she'd imagined living in once, back when she'd been young and foolish enough to believe in fairy tales. A little girl sat on the porch steps, no more than 6 years old, with golden curls that caught the late afternoon light. She was playing with a cloth doll, making it dance across her knees while humming a tuneless song. Clara's heart clenched at the sight. The child was dressed in crisp gingham with real lace at the collar, probably worth more than everything Clara had ever owned put together. The girl looked up as Clara approached the gate, her blue eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. "Hello?" she called out, her voice high and sweet. "Are you coming to see my papa?" Clara tried to answer, but her voice came out as a croak. She swallowed hard and tried again. Is your papa home, little one?" "He's in the barn with the horses. I'm Annie." The child stood up, smoothing her dress with careful hands. "You look tired. Do you want some water?" Tears pricked at Clara's eyes. This slip of a girl, offering kindness so easily to a stranger who looked like she'd crawled out of the desert. "That's very kind of you, Annie. I would be grateful for some water." Annie disappeared into the house before Clara could say another word. Through the open door, Clara caught a glimpse of polished floors and fine furniture, a world so far removed from her own experience, it might as well have been another country. "Annie, who are you talking to?" The voice was deep, masculine, and came from somewhere behind Clara. She turned slowly, her hands trembling as she gripped the gate. James Hollis was everything the gossips had said and more. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years working under the open sky. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and his eyes were the color of good coffee, brown and warm and sharp all at once. He wore simple work clothes, but even covered in barn dust, he carried himself like a man who knew his own worth. Those coffee-colored eyes narrowed as they took in Clara's appearance, the torn dress, the sunburned face, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. His jaw tightened, and Clara braced herself for the inevitable rejection. "Ma'am," he said, his voice careful and controlled. "Can I help you?" Clara lifted her chin, summoning the last reserves of her strength. "Mr. Hollis, I've come a long way, and I'm in need of—" The words stuck in her throat. How did you ask for charity while keeping your dignity? How did you beg without losing yourself completely? "Papa!" Annie burst through the door, carefully carrying a glass of water. "The lady is thirsty. I brought her some water." James's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. "That was thoughtful of you. Sweetheart." He opened the gate, and Clara noticed how his hand hesitated for just a moment before he gestured for her to enter. "Please, come sit on the porch. You look about ready to fall over." Clara wanted to protest, to maintain some pretense of strength, but her legs made the decision for her. She sank onto the porch steps, accepting the glass from Annie with shaking hands. The water was cool and clean, better than anything she'd tasted in weeks. "Slowly," James cautioned, settling himself a careful distance away. "Too fast and you'll make yourself sick." Annie plopped down between them, her doll forgotten. She studied Clara with the unabashed curiosity of childhood. "What's your name?" "Clara," she managed between careful sips. "Clara." "Just Clara is fine," James interrupted gently. "Annie, why don't you go ask Rosita to set another place for supper?" The little girl jumped up eagerly. "Is Clara staying for supper? Can she, Papa, please?" James glanced at Clara, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, pity, perhaps, or simple human decency. "If she'd like to, yes." Annie clapped her hands and darted into the house, calling for Rosita. Clara set down the empty glass, her hands still trembling. "Mr. Hollis, I don't want you to think I'm not looking for—" "You're looking for a meal and a safe place to rest," he said quietly. "Nothing wrong with that. We've all been down on our luck at some point." Clara doubted that very much. She couldn't imagine this man ever being reduced to begging at strangers' doors, but she nodded, grateful for the fiction that preserved what little remained of her pride. "I can work," she said quickly. "I can cook, clean, mend. I'm not asking for charity. I'll earn my keep, even if it's just for one night." James studied her for a long moment, and Clara had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. "We'll see about that. For now, you're a guest. Rosita will show you where you can wash up before supper." An older Mexican woman appeared in the doorway, her face kind but wary. James spoke to her in rapid Spanish, and she nodded, gesturing for Clara to follow. The house was even finer inside than Clara had imagined. Real carpets on the floors, paintings on the walls, and furniture that gleamed with polish. She tried not to gawk as Rosita led her to a small room off the kitchen with a wash basin and clean towels. "Señorita," Rosita said softly, producing a clean shirt, waist, and skirt from somewhere. They are not used anymore. You take, see." Clara's throat closed up. The clothes were far nicer than anything she'd owned even in better days. "I couldn't—" "You take," Rosita insisted, pressing them into Clara's hands. "Is no good sitting in cupboard. You wash, change, then come eat." When Clara emerged 20 minutes later, clean and dressed in the borrowed clothes, she felt almost human again. The dining room was lit by oil lamps that cast a warm glow over the long table. James sat at the head, with Annie beside him, practically bouncing in her chair. "You look pretty," Annie exclaimed. "Doesn't she look pretty, Papa?" A faint color touched James's cheeks. "Annie, mind your manners. Clara, please, sit." The meal was simple but plentiful: beef stew, fresh bread, green beans from the garden. Clara tried to eat slowly, mindful of her manners, but her body betrayed her hunger. She was halfway through her second helping when Annie made the announcement that changed everything. "Papa," the little girl said, her voice matter-of-fact, "I think Clara should stay. She could be my new mama." Clara's spoon clattered to the table. James went very still, his knuckles white as he gripped his fork. The silence stretched out, painful and suffocating. "Annie," James said, his voice tight with controlled emotion, "we've talked about this. You can't just—" "But she's nice, and she's pretty, and she smiled at me. Mama used to smile at me just like that." Annie's lower lip trembled. "I miss having a mama." Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. She pushed back from the table, the borrowed clothes suddenly feeling like chains. "I should go. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I should go." "No!" Annie's voice rose to a wail. "Mama, don't go! Please don't go!" The word hit Clara like a physical blow. Mama, this precious child, looking at her with such desperate hope. And James, his face a mask of grief and anger, and something else she couldn't quite name. "I'm not," Clara whispered, but the words died in her throat. Because what could she say that she wasn't the child's mother? Annie knew that she wasn't worthy of the title. That was certainly true. James stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Annie, go to your room." "But Papa?" "Now." The little girl fled, sobbing. Clara heard her footsteps on the stairs, each one an accusation. She stared at her hands, unable to meet James's eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for— I'll leave first thing in the morning." James was quiet for so long that Clara finally looked up. He stood by the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said finally. "Fever took her in less than a week. Annie was barely 3. She doesn't really remember her mother, just the idea of her." He turned, and Clara was shocked to see tears on his cheeks. "She calls every woman who's kind to her mama. I've tried to break her of it, but she's lonely," Clara said softly. "She's a little girl who misses something she can barely remember. That's not something you can scold out of a child." James stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "No," he agreed quietly. "I suppose it's not." They stood there in the lamplight, 2 damaged souls brought together by a child's innocent wish. Outside, the desert wind howled, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. And upstairs, a little girl cried for a mother who existed only in her dreams, never knowing that fate had just delivered something far more complicated to her doorstep. Clara woke before dawn, the unfamiliar comfort of a real bed making her momentarily forget where she was. The sheets were clean and smelled of lavender, the pillow soft beneath her head. For a heartbeat, she allowed herself to imagine this was her life, waking in a proper bed, in a real home, with people who wanted her there. Then memory crashed back, bringing with it the weight of Annie's tears and James's stricken face. She sat up quickly, reaching for the borrowed clothes. She would dress, leave the garments neatly folded on the bed, and slip out before anyone stirred. It was better this way, cleaner. Let the child forget the strange woman who'd appeared and disappeared like a desert mirage. She was halfway down the stairs, boots in hand to muffle her steps, when a small voice stopped her cold. "Mama, you're not leaving, are you?" Annie stood at the bottom of the stairs in her nightgown, clutching her cloth doll. Her eyes were puffy from crying, her golden curls tangled from sleep. She looked so small, so vulnerable, that Clara's heart cracked like drought-parched earth. "Oh, sweetheart," Clara whispered, sinking down to sit on the step. "I'm not your mama. You know that, don't you?" Annie padded closer, her bare feet silent on the floor. "But you could be. You're nice. And you don't look at me like I'm being silly when I talk about things. Mrs. Garrett always tells me I talk too much, but you listened at supper." Clara reached out tentatively to smooth the child's hair. "Who's Mrs. Garrett?" "She comes to watch me sometimes when Papa has to go to town. She smells like medicine and makes me sit still for hours." Annie leaned into Clara's touch like a cat seeking warmth. "She says I need to learn to be a proper lady, but I don't think she knows what proper ladies do. She just sits and knits and tells me to be quiet." "Your Papa just wants what's best for you," Clara said carefully. "Papa's sad all the time," Annie confided. "He tries to smile, but it doesn't reach his eyes. Not like when Mama was here. I don't really remember her much, but I remember she made him laugh." Clara's throat tightened. This child, barely 6 years old, carrying the weight of her father's grief alongside her own loneliness. "Annie, There you are." James's voice came from the kitchen doorway. He was already dressed for the day, though his hair was slightly mussed and his shirt untucked. "Annie, what have I told you about wandering the house at night?" "It's morning, Papa," Annie pointed out with 6-year-old logic. "See, the sun's coming up." Despite everything, Clara saw James's lips twitch toward a smile. "So it is, but you're still in your night clothes. Go on up and get dressed. Rosita will help you." Annie grabbed Clara's hand. "Only if Miss Clara promises she won't leave." Clara looked helplessly at James. He rubbed his face with one hand, looking older than his years in the pale morning light. "Miss Clara and I need to talk," he said finally. "But she won't leave without saying goodbye. Will you, Miss Clara?" It was a trap of kindness, binding her with a child's trust. Clara nodded slowly. "I promise, Annie, I won't leave without saying goodbye. Satisfied?" Annie scampered back upstairs, calling for Rosita. Clara remained on the step, acutely aware of James watching her. "You were running," he said. It wasn't a question. Clara lifted her chin. "I thought it would be easier. For everyone." "Easier isn't always right." He moved into the hallway, leaning against the wall. "I owe you an apology for last night. Annie caught me off guard, but that's no excuse for my behavior." "You don't owe me anything. Mr. Hollis, I'm a stranger who showed up begging at your door. Your reaction was perfectly understandable." "Was it?" He studied her with those penetrating brown eyes. "You could have taken advantage, could have played along with Annie's fantasy, tried to ingratiate yourself, but you didn't. That tells me something about your character." Clara stood, still holding her boots. "What do you want from me?" "Mr. Hollis, I offered to work for my supper. I can clean, cook, mend whatever needs doing. Give me a day or two to earn what you've already given me, and then I'll move on." "To where?" The simple question stopped her short. To where? Indeed, she'd been drifting for so long. She'd almost forgotten there was supposed to be a destination. "The next town," she said quietly. "There's always a next town." "And when they turn you away, when the good women of the next town look at your worn shoes and mended dress and decide you're not the sort they want around their husbands and sons." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "That's not your concern." "No," he agreed. "It's not, but Annie's made it my concern. Hasn't she? She's decided you belong here, and that child has a will of iron beneath those curls. She'll pine and fret and make herself sick if you disappear now." "You can't be suggesting I stay because a 6-year-old. "I'm suggesting," James interrupted, "that you stay because we need help. Rosita's getting older, and she can't keep up with the house, and Annie both. Mrs. Garrett is—" He grimaced. "She means well, but Annie's right. The woman has all the warmth of a January blizzard. I've been looking for someone better, someone who could help with the house and be a companion to Annie." Clara stared at him. "You're offering me a position as what?" "A governess." "As whatever you're comfortable being called. Housekeeper, companion, helper. I don't much care about titles. Room, board, and fair wages. It's honest work. And despite what the gossips in town might say, I run a respectable house." It was too much, too fast. Yesterday she'd been prepared to sleep in a barn and steal eggs for breakfast. Now this man was offering her a home, work, a place in the world. Clara had learned long ago that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. "Why?" she asked. "You don't know anything about me. I know you were kind to my daughter when you had nothing to gain from it. I know you're proud enough to want to work for your keep. And I know you're running from something, but you haven't let it break you." He pushed away from the wall. "That's more than I know about most people." "The town won't like it," Clara warned. "A single woman in a widower's house." "The town can hang," James said bluntly. "Pardon my language, but I've got 5,000 acres and the biggest herd in 3 counties. They'll gossip no matter what I do." Before the Clara could respond, the sound of horses and wheels came from outside. James frowned, moving to the window. "Bit early for callers," he muttered. Clara peered over his shoulder and saw a fine carriage pulling up to the house. The woman who emerged was everything Clara wasn't elegantly dressed in deep purple silk, her dark hair arranged in perfect curls beneath a fashionable hat. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never wondered where her next meal would come from. "Martha Colton," James said, and Clara heard the resignation in his voice. "Widow of the late Judge Colton. She's been attentive since her year of mourning ended." Martha swept up to the front door like a woman on a mission. James opened it before she could knock. Clara hanging back in the shadows of the hallway. "James," Martha purred, her voice like honey over broken glass. "I do hope I'm not calling too early. I was so worried when I heard you'd taken in some unfortunate woman last night. You know how people talk." "People do seem to have a lot of time on their hands," James said dryly. "Clara's not an unfortunate woman. Martha, she's my new housekeeper." Martha's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "Your housekeeper, how sudden, and without references. I assume really. James, you must be more careful. There are all sorts of desperate characters drifting through these days. Women who'll take advantage of a man's kindness." Clara stepped forward before she could stop herself. "You're absolutely right. Mrs. Colton, which is why I've offered to work a week without wages, to prove my worth. If Mr. Hollis isn't satisfied with my work, I'll move on with no hard feelings." Martha's eyes swept over Clara, taking in every mended spot and worn edge. Her lip curled slightly. "How very enterprising of you. And what skills exactly do you bring to this position?" "I can cook, clean, sew, tend gardens, care for children, and I've helped with birthing calves when needed." Clara said calmly, "I also know how to mind my own business and keep a respectable house, which I understand are valuable qualities in a housekeeper." The barb hit home. Martha's cheeks flushed, but she recovered quickly. "Well, I suppose James knows his own mind, though I do worry about dear little Annie, forming attachments to someone who might not stay." "Miss Clara, you're still here." Annie's voice rang out as she bounded down the stairs, now dressed but with her pinafore crooked. She skidded to a stop when she saw Martha. "Oh, good morning, Mrs. Colton." Martha's smile was arctic. "Good morning, Annie. Your pinafore is all askew. Hasn't anyone taught you to dress properly?" Annie's face fell. Clara moved without thinking, kneeling to straighten the child's clothes. "You did just fine, sweetheart. Sometimes the buttons are tricky, aren't they?" "Miss Clara's going to be our new housekeeper," Annie announced, beaming. "She's going to stay and help take care of us." "Is she indeed?" Martha's voice could have frozen water. "How nice for you." "Martha, I appreciate your concern. James said firmly. "But I believe I'm capable of making decisions for my own household. Was there something specific you needed?" "I brought some of my famous apple preserves," Martha said, producing a jar from her basket. "I know how you enjoy them, though I suppose now you'll have someone else to make preserves for you." "That's kind of you," James said, taking the jar. "I'm sure we'll enjoy them." Martha lingered a moment longer, clearly hoping for an invitation to stay. When none came, she gathered her skirts. "Well, I'll leave you to your domestic arrangements. Do be careful, James. Not everyone is what they seem." She swept out with as much drama as she'd entered. Through the window, Clara watched her carriage depart in a cloud of dust. "Well," James said after a moment, "that went about as well as expected." "She's in love with you," Clara observed. "She's in love with the idea of being Mrs. James Hollis and mistress of the Bar Ranch," he corrected. "There's a difference." "Papa doesn't like Mrs. Colton," Annie confided to Clara. "She smells too sweet and she pinches when she thinks no one's looking." "Annie," James warned. "It's true. She pinched my arm at the church picnic and said I was getting too big for my britches. I don't even wear britches." Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling. "Well, we can't have that. Good thing I'm here to protect you from pinching ladies." Annie threw her arms around Clara's waist. "I knew you'd stay. I just knew it." Over the child's head, Clara met James's eyes. He nodded slightly, and she realized her decision had been made the moment Annie called her Mama on the stairs. She couldn't fix this child's loss or this man's grief, but maybe she could bring a little warmth back to this too-quiet house. "All right, then," she said softly. "I'll stay, but there are conditions." "Name them," James said. "I work for my keep, no charity. And when you find someone better suited, someone with proper references and training, you tell me straight. No letting me think I have a place here when I don't." "Fair enough. My conditions are simple. Be kind to my daughter. Run the house as you see fit, and don't let Martha Colton or her cronies run you off." Clara straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Hollis, I've survived worse than a few gossiping biddies. You have yourself a housekeeper." Annie cheered, dancing around them. Rosita appeared from the kitchen, smiling approval, and James Hollis looked at Clara with something that might have been hope, the first genuine emotion she'd seen in his eyes since she'd arrived. Outside, the sun climbed higher into the vast Texas sky, and the Bar Ranch began another day. But inside the big white house, something had shifted. A desperate woman had found shelter, a lonely child had found comfort, and a grieving man had found, perhaps, the beginning of something he hadn't dared to name. The storm came 3 weeks later, rolling across the desert like God's own fury. Clara had seen bad weather before, but nothing like this, a wall of dust and wind that turned day into night and set the cattle to bellowing in terror. "You get inside," James shouted over the howling wind, his face already caked with dirt. "Tom, get those horses secured, Miguel. Help me with the barn doors." Clara stood on the porch, her apron whipping around her legs, watching the ranch hands scramble to prepare. She'd learned their names by now: Tom Bradley, the young foreman with dreams bigger than Texas; Miguel Santos, whose family had worked this land longer than anyone; Old Pete, who could predict weather by his creaking joints but hadn't predicted this. "Miss Clara?" Rosita called from inside. "The windows." Clara rushed back in, helping the older woman shut her windows and secure doors. Annie stood in the parlor, clutching her doll, eyes wide with fear as the house groaned under the wind's assault. "Come here, sweetheart," Clara said, gathering the child into her arms. "It's just a storm. We're safe inside." "What about Papa? What about the horses?" "Your Papa knows what to do. He's faced storms before." Clara hoped she sounded more confident than she felt. Through the window, she could see James and his men struggling with a barn door that had broken free, the heavy wood threatening to become a deadly projectile. "We should help," Clara decided suddenly. She set Annie down. "Stay here with Rosita. Don't go near the windows." "Clara, no," Rosita protested. "Senor James say stay inside." But Clara was already wrapping a shawl around her head and pushing through the door. The wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and filling her eyes with grit. She stumbled toward the barn, where James and Tom were losing their battle with the door. "What are you doing?" James roared when he saw her. "Get back inside." "You need help." Clara grabbed the rope Tom was holding, adding her weight to theirs. Her hands, already toughened from weeks of work, burned as the rope tried to tear free. "On 3, James shouted. 1, 2. They pulled together, muscles straining, and finally wrestled the door into place. Tom scrambled to secure the latch while James grabbed Clara's arm. "You little fool," he growled, but his eyes showed more concern than anger. "You could have been hurt." "So could you," Clara shot back, having to yell to be heard. "I'm not some delicate flower, Mr. Hollis. I've weathered storms before." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or respect, but there was no time to analyze it. The wind was picking up, and they could hear the crash of something breaking near the house. "The grain shed," Miguel pointed. Half the roof had torn away, precious feed scattering into the wind. Without thinking, Clara joined the rush to save what they could. She worked alongside the men, filling sacks, hauling supplies, her dress plastered to her body with sweat and dust. When a piece of flying debris caught Tom across the shoulder, she was there to help him to safety, tearing strips from her petticoat to bind the wound. The storm raged for hours. By the time it finally began to die, Clara could barely stand. Her hair had come completely undone, hanging in dusty strings around her face. Her hands were raw, her back screaming. But she'd kept working until the last animal was secure and the last bit of salvageable grain was under cover. She found James sitting on a barrel in the barn, head in his hands. His shirt was torn, revealing a nasty bruise along his ribs where something had struck him. "Let me see," Clara said softly. He looked up, and she was struck by the exhaustion in his eyes. "It's nothing." That's what all men say until they keel over. She knelt beside him, gently probing the injury. "Bruised, maybe cracked, but not broken. You're lucky." "Am I?" His voice was rough. "Lost half my feed, maybe more. Got a dozen heads scattered to hell and gone. Tom's hurt and—" He stopped, looking at her properly for the first time. "You're bleeding." Clara touched her cheek, surprised to find blood on her fingers. "Just a scratch." "Come on." He stood, swaying slightly. "Let's get you cleaned up." They made their way back to the house together, leaning on each other without quite admitting that's what they were doing. Annie flew at them the moment they entered. "Papa, Miss Clara, I was so scared." "We're all right, little one," James assured her, though he winced as she hugged him. Rosita clucked over them both, producing basins of water and clean cloths. Clara tried to protest that she could tend herself, but the older woman wouldn't hear it. "You work like a man in that storm," Rosita said, dabbing at the cut on Clara's cheek. "Senor James, he never see a woman work like that." "My wife wouldn't have," James said quietly. He was sitting at the kitchen table, letting Tom's wife, Mary, bind his ribs. Elizabeth was delicate. Storms frightened her. It was the first time he'd said his wife's name in Clara's presence. She held still under Rosita's ministrations, unsure how to respond. "Different women have different strengths," she said finally. I'm sure she had her own kind of courage. James looked at her for a long moment. "You defended my barn like it was your own." "It is my own, in a way." Clara said, "This is my home now, for as long as you'll have me. When you protect your home, you protect it with everything you have." Miss Clara was brave, wasn't she? "Papa," Annie piped up, "just like the ladies in my storybooks who fight dragons." "No dragons here," Clara said, smoothing the child's hair. Just a cranky old storm that forgot its manners. Later, after the damage had been assessed and the hands had been fed and sent to their rest, Clara found James on the porch. The evening sky was clear, stars beginning to appear as if the storm had never happened. 20 years I've been building this place, he said without preamble. 20 years of blood and sweat and sacrifice, one storm, and I could lose it all. But you didn't, Clara pointed out, settling into the chair beside him. You saved most of the grain. The cattle will be found. Tom will heal. You'll rebuild what was broken. You sound very sure. I am sure. I've seen how you run this place, how your men respect you. That kind of loyalty isn't built on fear or money alone. They fought that storm for you because they believe in what you're building here. And you, he turned to look at her. What do you believe in? Clara. She was quiet for a moment, considering. I believe in work, in earning your place, in protecting what matters. And I believe, she hesitated, then forged ahead. I believe Annie was right to call me here. Not as her mama, maybe, but as someone who was needed. You could have been killed today. So could any of us. That's the bargain we make out here. Isn't it? The land gives, but it takes two. You stand your ground, or you get blown away. James leaned back, wincing at his injured ribs. Elizabeth used to beg me to move back east, said this land would kill us all eventually. Maybe it will, Clara admitted. But what's the alternative, living safe and small, never fighting for anything? She stood, suddenly self-conscious. I should check on Annie. Clara, his voice stopped her at the door. Thank you, for today. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Inside. She could hear Annie telling Rosita about how brave Miss Clara had been, embellishing the story with each telling. By tomorrow, Clara would probably be wrestling the storm itself with her bare hands. But as she climbed the stairs to check on the child, Clara caught sight of herself in the hall mirror, dust-caked, wind-burned, her hair a disaster, the cut on her cheek already scabbing over. She looked nothing like the desperate woman who'd stumbled up to this house just 3 weeks ago. That woman had been running from life, existing on the margins, ready to disappear at the first sign of trouble. This woman, the one looking back at her with steady eyes, had stood her ground, had fought beside the men, had earned their grudging respect, had proved she belonged here through sweat and courage rather than sweet words. Miss Clara, Annie called from her room. Will you tell me a story? Of course, sweetheart. Clara called back. Let me just wash my face first. Tell me about the storm, Annie requested when Clara appeared. Tell me how you and Papa fought it together. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, tucking the quilts around the little girl. Well, it was a very big storm, with winds that could blow a cow clear to Mexico. As she spun the tale, making it exciting but not too frightening, Clara felt something settle in her chest. She'd been so many things in her life, daughter, worker, wanderer, survivor. But sitting here in this lamplight room with this trusting child hanging on her every word and the sound of James's boots on the porch below, she felt something new. She felt like she was home. Outside, the desert night was peaceful, as if the storm had never been. But its passage had changed things. In trying to destroy, it had instead revealed the strength that bound this makeshift family together. And somewhere in the barn, Tom Bradley was telling the other hands how Miss Clara had worked like two men, while in town, the gossips would soon have a new story about the strange woman at the bar ranch who wasn't afraid of anything. Let them talk, Clara thought as Annie's eyes grew heavy. She'd earned her place here with blood and sweat and courage, and no storm, whether from the sky or from wagging tongues, was going to blow her away now. The rumors started as whispers, but grew louder with each passing week. Clara heard them when she went to town for supplies, hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered the general store. Sidelong glances from women who clutched their baskets closer as she passed. That's her, she heard Mrs. Garrett hissed to her companion outside the church. Living in sin with James Hollis, bold as brass, and that poor little girl calling her mama already. Clara kept her head high, selecting her purchases with steady hands. She'd survived worse than gossip, but it still stung, especially when she saw how it affected James. He'd returned from the cattle auction in San Antonio with a face like thunder. Clara was in the garden with Annie, teaching her to tell the difference between weeds and vegetables, when he stormed past without a word. "Papa's angry," Annie observed, dirt smudged across her nose. "He gets that look when people say mean things." "How do you know people said mean things?" Clara asked gently. "Because he always comes home looking like that after town. Mrs. Colton says it's because of you. She told Mrs. Garrett that you're not respectable." Annie frowned. What does that mean? Clara's heart ached for this perceptive child. "It means some people judge others without really knowing them. Come on, let's get these carrots to Rosita." That evening, James barely touched his supper. Annie chattered about her day, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched when he thought no one was looking. After Annie went to bed, Clara found him in his study, staring at ledgers without seeing them. "You might as well tell me," she said from the doorway. "I've got thick skin, Mr. Hollis." He looked up, and she saw anger flash in his eyes, not at her, but for her. "Bill Morrison suggested I should keep you in the barn with the other livestock, since that's apparently where women of your sort belong." Clara flinched despite herself. "I see." "I knocked him down for it." James's voice was flat, in front of half the town, which only made things worse. "Of course. Now they're saying you've bewitched me." "Maybe you should." "Don't!" He stood abruptly. "Don't you dare suggest leaving. That's what they want. Martha's been filling everyone's ears with poison, saying you're after my money, that you've set your cap for me like some desperate woman who showed up begging at your door," Clara finished quietly. "Because that's exactly what I did, Mr. Hollis. They're not entirely wrong." "Yes, they are." His voice was fierce. "You've worked harder than any two women since you arrived. You've brought light back to this house, given Annie something I couldn't, a mother's care. You've earned your place here 10 times over. The town doesn't see it that way. Then the town can go to hell." The profanity shocked them both. James ran his hand through his hair, messing it thoroughly. "I apologize, but I'm tired of their sanctimonious judgment. Half those women have secrets that would curl your hair, but they point fingers at you because you're an easier target." Clara moved into the room, drawn by his distress. "This is hurting your business, your reputation." "My reputation can survive, but Annie can't lose another mother. She's already so attached to you." "Just Annie?" The question slipped out before Clara could stop it. James went very still. They stood there in the lamplight, the air between them suddenly charged with possibility. Clara could hear her own heartbeat, could see the pulse jumping in his throat. "Papa!" Annie's voice from upstairs shattered the moment. "Papa, I had a bad dream." "I'll go," Clara said quickly, fleeing before either of them could acknowledge what had almost happened. The next morning brought Martha Colton in full war paint. She arrived with 2 other prominent townswomen, Mrs. Judge Thornberry and Mrs. Reverend Michaels like generals preparing for battle. Clara was teaching Annie her letters at the kitchen table when Rosita announced the visitors. She started to excuse herself, but Martha's voice rang out. "Oh no, do stay. Miss, what was your last name again? You never did say." Clara straightened her spine. "Just Clara is fine. Mrs. Colton." How mysterious. Martha's smile was razor sharp. "Ladies, this is the woman we've been hearing so much about. Mrs. Thornberry." A thin woman with a face like curdled milk sniffed audibly. "I must say, James, we're concerned. It's highly irregular, having an unmarried woman of unknown origins in your household." "Clara's origins are her own business," James said coldly. as is whom I employ. But it's not just about you, is it, Mrs. Michaels, younger and somewhat kinder looking, glanced at Annie. There's the child to consider. What kind of example? Miss Clara teaches me letters and numbers and how to grow carrots, Annie interrupted. And she makes Papa smile. That's a good example, isn't it? The women exchanged glances. Martha leaned forward. Annie, dear, wouldn't you like a proper governess? Someone with references and training. I know several suitable ladies in San Antonio who... I don't want a suitable lady, Annie said stubbornly. I want Miss Clara. Children don't always know what's best for them, Mrs. Thornberry observed. James, surely you see the impropriety. What will people think? I've stopped caring what people think, James replied. That's quite obvious, Martha snapped, her composure cracking. Really, James, I've tried to be understanding. I know you've been lonely since Elizabeth passed, but to take up with the first adventuress who... That's enough. James's voice was deadly quiet. Clara is a respected member of my household. She's shown more Christian charity and genuine kindness in 6 weeks than I've seen from some people in years. If you've come here to insult her, you can leave. The silence stretched taut. Clara felt Annie's small hand slip into hers under the table. We're only trying to help, Mrs. Michaels said weakly. No, Clara said, finding her voice. You're trying to protect your idea of propriety. I understand. A woman alone, no family, no past. You can verify I'm everything you've been taught to suspect. But I wonder, have any of you asked what brought me to that state? Have you wondered what circumstances could drive a woman to wander alone in the desert? She stood, still holding Annie's hand. I've been hungry. I've been cold. I've been so tired I could barely stand. But I kept my dignity, and I kept my honor, even when it would have been easier to trade them for comfort. I work for my bread here, and I care for this child as if she were my own. If that makes me unsuitable in your eyes, then perhaps your standards need examining. Martha's face flushed an ugly red. How dare you? How dare you? Clara interrupted. How dare you come into this house and try to poison a child against someone she trusts? How dare you judge what you don't understand? And how dare you use God's name to justify your petty jealousies and small-minded fears? Clara, James said softly, and she realized she was shaking. I'll get your tea, she managed, and fled to the kitchen. Through the door, she could hear James's voice, cold and formal, dismissing the women, their protests, Martha's shrill insistence that he was making a terrible mistake. Then the blessed sound of the front door closing. Clara gripped the edge of the kitchen table, trying to steady herself. She'd ruined everything. James had been defending her, and she'd repaid him by losing her temper and making things worse. That was magnificent. She spun to find him standing in the doorway, an odd expression on his face. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I shouldn't have spoken to your guests that way. I've made more trouble for you. Those weren't guests. They were vultures, circling what they thought was weakness. He moved closer. No one's ever defended themselves to Martha Colton like that. She's had this town under her thumb since her husband died and left her all that money. She wants to marry you. She wants to own me, James corrected. There's a difference, just like there's a difference between what they say you are and what you really are. And what am I really? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He was close enough now that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, could smell the leather and soap scent of him. You're the woman who fought a storm beside me, who tends my daughter like she's precious, who stands up to the biggest gossips in town without flinching. You're... He paused, seeming to search for words. You're necessary. Clara, this house needs you. Annie needs you. And you! Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. What do you need? His hand came up, fingers barely brushing the bruise on her cheek from the storm. I need... He started, then pulled back as if burned. I need to remember that you're under my protection, that you deserve better than having your reputation destroyed because I'm too selfish to let you go." "What if I don't want to go?" Clara asked. "What if I'm exactly where I want to be?" "Then you're a fool," he said roughly. "Because Martha won't stop. She'll make your life miserable. Turn the whole town against you. You could go somewhere else. Start fresh. Find a man who can offer you marriage without scandal." "I don't want another man," Clara said, then immediately colored at her boldness. "I mean, I'm not looking for... That's not why I know why you stayed," James said gently. "For Annie. And I'm grateful. But I won't have you sacrificed on the altar of this town's hypocrisy. If it gets too bad, if they make things impossible for you, promise me you'll tell me. Promise me you won't just disappear one night because you think it's better for us." Clara thought of that first morning, when she'd tried to do exactly that. "I promise," she said, "but only if you promise not to send me away just to protect me from gossip. I'm stronger than I look. Mr. Hollis." "James," he said suddenly. "In private, at least. Mr. Hollis makes me feel like my father." "James," she repeated, tasting the name. It felt dangerous, intimate. "Papa, Miss Clara." Annie appeared in the doorway, looking worried. "Are you fighting? I don't like it when people fight." "We're not fighting, sweetheart," Clara assured her. "We're just making sure we understand each other." Annie studied them with those two wise eyes. "Mrs. Colton made you sad. I don't like her." "We shouldn't say we don't like people," James said automatically. "Even when it's true?" Annie asked. Clara caught James's eye and saw her own amusement reflected there. "Even then," she said. "But maybe we can say we don't like how they behave sometimes." "I don't like how Mrs. Colton behaves all the time," Annie declared, which startled a laugh out of James. It was the first genuine laugh Clara had heard from him, and it transformed his face. For a moment, she glimpsed the man he must have been before grief settled over him like dust. Her heart did a peculiar little flip in her chest. "Come on, little rebel," he said, swinging Annie up into his arms. "Let's go check on the horses before it gets too hot." "Can Miss Clara come?" "If she wants to," James said, looking at Clara over his daughter's head. Clara nodded, following them out into the bright morning. The storm in the parlor had passed, but she knew it was only the beginning. Martha Colton wouldn't give up easily, and the town's judgment would grow harsher. But watching James carry Annie toward the barn, hearing their mingled laughter, Clara felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her chest. They called her an adventuress, a gold digger, worse. Let them. She'd found something here worth fighting for, a makeshift family held together by need and growing affection, a place where she was valued for her work and her care rather than her prettiness or pedigree. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, the proper ladies of Willow Creek with their gossip and their propriety and their small, mean hearts. On the other, a widow's daughter who needed a mother's love, a good man who deserved happiness, and a woman with no past who was finally building a future. Clara knew which side she'd chosen. Now she just had to be strong enough to hold the line. The morning James publicly defended Clara changed everything. It happened at Sunday service. Of all places, when Reverend Michaels made a thinly veiled sermon about wolves among the sheep while staring directly at Clara's pew. James stood up in the middle of the sermon, the sound echoing through the small church like a gunshot. Every head turned. "Reverend," he said, his voice carrying clearly, "I believe Christ said, 'Judge not, lest ye be judged.' Perhaps you could preach on that next week." The silence was deafening. Clara felt her face burn as 200 eyes fixed on her. Annie, sitting between them, slipped her small hand into Clara's. "Mr. Hollis," the Reverend stuttered. "I wasn't—" "Yes, you were." James looked around the congregation, his gaze lingering on Martha Colton's shocked face. "You all were. For 2 months. You've whispered and pointed and judged a woman whose only crime was accepting honest work when she needed it. Clara has shown more Christian virtue than half this congregation combined."
"James,"
Clara whispered, tugging at his sleeve.
"please, sit down."
But he wasn't finished. "She works from dawn to dusk. She's taught my daughter to read and write better in 2 months than Mrs. Garrett managed in a year. She tends the sick among my ranch hands without being asked. She's mended your clothes. Mrs. Morrison. When you needed help with the church bazaar, she donated her own few possessions to the charity drive. Mrs. Thornberry. While you contributed your cast-offs, each name hit like a blow. The accused women flushed and looked away. If living in my house and caring for my child makes her a scarlet woman in your eyes, then your eyes need examining. Now, if you'll excuse us." He took Annie's other hand. "We'll worship God somewhere he's not used as a weapon against good people." They walked out together, Clara's legs shaking so badly she could barely manage it. Behind them, the church erupted in shocked whispers.
"Papa, are we in trouble?"
Annie asked once they were outside. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes doing right feels like trouble, but it's not." He looked at Clara over Annie's head. "I'm sorry. I should have done that weeks ago." "You shouldn't have done it at all," Clara said, though her heart was racing at his defense. "You've made powerful enemies."
"They were already enemies. Now they're just out in the open about it."
That afternoon, something shifted at the ranch. Tom Bradley was the first to approach, hat in hand. "Miss Clara," he said awkwardly. "What, Mr. Hollis said in church. Well, the boys and I want you to know we appreciate all you do. You're one of us, far as we're concerned." One by one, the ranch hands found excuses to express similar sentiments. Miguel's wife brought tamales. Old Pete carved a wooden horse for Annie from Miss Clara's friend. Even the taciturn Chuck mumbled something about her biscuits being better than his mother's. But the warmth from the ranch couldn't offset the chill from town. Deliveries began arriving late or not at all. The laundress suddenly couldn't take their washing. The seamstress was too busy to alter Annie's dresses. "We'll manage," Clara said grimly, taking on the washing herself. Her hands finally healed from the storm, split open again from the lye soap. James found her one evening struggling with his shirts in the fading light, tears of frustration on her cheeks. "This is ridiculous," he said, gently taking the washboard from her. "I'll hire someone from San Antonio."
"That's what they want," Clara said. "To make life so difficult, I'll leave."
"I won't give them the satisfaction." "Stubborn woman." But his voice was fond. "At least let me help." The sight of James Hollis doing laundry would have scandalized the town even more, but Clara was too tired to argue. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, and when he called her Darlin, while reaching for more soap, neither of them pretended it was an accident. Annie had taken to defending Clara with the fierce loyalty of childhood. When the Garrett children teased her at the weekly dancing lesson, she bloodied Timothy Garrett's nose and informed him that Miss Clara is better than all your mothers combined.
"Violence isn't the answer,"
Clara said, dabbing at Annie's scraped knuckles. "It worked, though," Annie pointed out. "He stopped saying mean things." "What did he say?" James asked from the doorway. Annie's face darkened.
"He said Miss Clara was a bad woman who was trying to steal his mother's place.
But his mother doesn't even want to marry you. Papa, she just likes coming here to complain about things." Despite everything, Clara had to hide a smile. Out of the mouths of babes. Indeed. The evening James called her Darlin for the second time, they were sitting on the porch watching Annie chase fireflies. The words slipped out naturally as he asked her to pass the coffee, and this time they both noticed. "I apologize," he said after a moment. "That was too familiar."
"Was it?" Clara kept her eyes on Annie. "We've been living as a family for months now. Surely we're past formalities. Are we—"
He turned to look at her.
"What are we—" "Clara."
It was the question that had hung between them for weeks, growing heavier with each passing day. Clara set down her cup carefully.
I don't know,
she admitted.
I know what the town thinks we are. I know what Annie wants us to be. But you and I dream about you.
The confession hung in the air between them. Clara's breath caught. I dream about finding you in the garden, or at the stove, or reading to Annie. Simple things. But I wake up reaching for you, and the emptiness. He stopped, running his hand through his hair. I loved Elizabeth. When she died, I thought that part of me died too. But then you arrived, looking like you'd blown in from another world, and everything I thought was dead started waking up.
James,
Clara whispered. I know I have no right. You came here for shelter, not to be courted by a grieving widower with a child. You deserve better than stolen moments and the weight of my past. Clara turned to face him fully. What if I don't want better? What if I want this you and Annie and this life we've built? What if I'm tired of running and want to stand still for once? He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hand. Then you're braver than I am, because I'm terrified. Of what? Of losing again, of not being enough, of ruining your life with my selfishness. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Of how much I want to kiss you right now. Clara's heart was thundering so loud she was sure Annie would hear it. I'm frightened too. I've never felt safe enough to want something this much. Can I? Papa, Miss Clara, look how many I caught. Annie ran up, her jar full of blinking lights. They pulled apart, but something fundamental had shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, replaced by an awareness that colored everything. Over the following days, the town's punishment intensified. The bank questioned James's credit. The feed store had supply problems. Even the doctor was suddenly too busy to make his regular visit to check on the ranch hands. Martha Colton made one last assault, arriving with the sheriff and a man in a city suit. This is Mr. Hartwell, she announced triumphantly. A private investigator from Dallas. He's discovered some very interesting things about your Miss Clara. Clara's blood ran cold. Her past, the things she'd run so far to escape, finally catching up. Such as? James asked coldly. Such as there's no record of a Clara matching her description in any of the surrounding territories. No family, no former employers, no history at all. It's as if she appeared out of thin air. Martha's smile was vicious. Suspicious, wouldn't you say? Not particularly, James said. Lots of people start over in the West. People with nothing to hide don't change their names. Mr. Hartwell observed. Clara lifted her chin. My name is Clara. That's all that matters now. Is it? Martha pressed. Or should we be looking for wanted posters? What are you running from? That's enough. James stepped forward. Sheriff, is Clara accused of any crime? Sheriff Williams, looking uncomfortable, shook his head. No formal accusations. James, but if she's wanted somewhere. She's wanted here, James said firmly. That's all that concerns me. Now, unless you have legal business, get off my land. Martha's face contorted. You fool! She's bewitched you. Can't you see she's using you? The only person trying to use me is you, Martha. James's voice was deadly calm. You've schemed and manipulated for months, thinking you could bully your way into this family. But we're not possessions to be acquired. Now leave, and don't come back. After they left, Clara sank onto the porch steps, shaking. They won't stop. They'll keep digging until they find... I don't care what they find. James sat beside her, taking her trembling hands. Whatever sent you running, whatever you were before, it doesn't matter. I know who you are now. You don't understand. If they find out, there are things that can't be forgiven. Things that... Look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. Do you trust me? Yes, she whispered. Then trust me with this. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. But not today. Today, you're Clara, and you're home, and you're safe. That's all that matters. That evening, as Clara tucked Annie into bed, the little girl asked, "Is Miss Clara in trouble because of me? Because I called her Mama?" Clara smoothed the child's hair. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes people are just afraid of things they don't understand." "I'm not afraid," Annie said firmly. "I love you, Miss Clara." The words, so simple and freely given, broke something open in Clara's chest. "I love you too, Annie, more than you know." Later, she found James in his study, writing letters with fierce concentration. "Calling in favors," he explained. "Friends in San Antonio and Dallas who owe me. If Martha wants a war, she'll get one." "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do." He set down his pen. "Clara, I meant what I said today. Your past is your own, but your future—" He paused. "I'd like your future to be here, with us, if you'll have us." It wasn't a formal proposal, but Clara heard the promise in it. Despite everything, the gossip, the threats, the secrets still lurking in her past, she felt hope blooming in her chest like a desert flower after rain. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," she said softly. He stood, crossing to her. This time, when he reached for her, she didn't pull away. His kiss was gentle, careful, as if she might disappear. She pressed closer, trying to tell him without words that she was real. She was staying. She was his if he wanted her. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, he rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever comes," he murmured, "we face it together." "Together," Clara agreed, and for the first time in her life, she truly meant it. Life on the ranch had never been easy, but the challenges seemed to multiply after James's public declaration. The first sign of real trouble came when riders were spotted near the eastern pastures, men who disappeared when the ranch hands approached but left clear signs of surveillance. "Rustlers," Tom Bradley said grimly, showing James the tracks. "Testing our defenses, most like." Clara overheard from the kitchen window where she was kneading bread, her hands stilled on the dough. She'd learned enough about ranch life to know what rustlers meant: stolen cattle, violence, men who operated outside the law's reach. Double the night watch. James ordered, "And nobody rides alone." The precautions seemed to work for a week. Then 10 head of prime beef went missing from the north pasture, spirited away in the night despite the extra guards. "Inside information," old Pete muttered. Someone told him exactly where to hit and when. James's face was granite. "Find out who, quietly." Clara threw herself into the work of supporting the ranch. When the hands rode out before dawn to search for the missing cattle, she had hot coffee and cold biscuits ready. When they returned empty-handed and discouraged, she doctored cuts and offered encouragement. The kitchen became a war room where strategies were discussed over her stew and cornbread. "You don't have to do this," James told her one evening, finding her mending Miguel's torn shirt by lamplight. "It's not your fight. Everything that threatens this ranch threatens my home," Clara said firmly. "That makes it my fight." He kissed her forehead, a gesture that had become common between them, these small intimacies that spoke of growing trust and affection. "What did I do to deserve you?" "Opened your door to a desperate stranger," she said lightly, though her heart swelled at his words. The second raid was bolder. 20 had taken, and shots fired when Tom and Chuck tried to intervene. Tom came back with a graze on his shoulder that Clara cleaned and bandaged, her hands steady despite her internal trembling. "They knew exactly when the patrol would be at the other end of the property," Tom said through gritted teeth. "Someone's feeding them information. Mr. Hollis, someone who knows our routines." Suspicion fell on the newest hand, a drifter named Polk who'd hired on a month back. But Clara noticed something else. Deliveries from town always seemed to precede the raids. The feed store wagon, the weekly supplies from the general store, even the mail carrier. "They're watching who comes and goes," she told James privately. using the legitimate traffic to hide their reconnaissance. James studied her with those penetrating eyes. That's a very astute observation. Where did you learn to think like that? Clara hesitated, then said carefully, "When you've been on the run, you learn to notice patterns, to see how people watch and wait and plan." He didn't press for more, but she saw the questions in his eyes. Another piece of her mystery revealed, another reminder that she carried secrets that might someday shatter this life they were building. The tension affected everyone. Annie had nightmares about bad men taking her papa away. The hands were short-tempered, jumping at shadows. Even Rosita muttered prayers over her cooking, crossing herself whenever riders appeared on the horizon. Clara found her own way to fight back. She organized the women Rosita, Miguel's wife Maria, Tom's wife Sarah into an information network. Women noticed things men overlooked, heard gossip that might seem trivial but could piece together into something larger. It was Maria who first mentioned seeing Martha Colton's foreman drinking with strangers at the Mexican cantina in town. "He was showing them a paper," Maria reported. "Like a map. They gave him money." The pieces clicked into place. Martha denied her prize, striking back through proxies, using her knowledge of the ranch gained through years of social calls to guide the rustlers. "We can't prove it," James said when Clara told him. "Martha's too clever to leave evidence." "Then we have to be cleverer," Clara said. The plan came together slowly. Clara suggested they change the patrol patterns, but only tell the most trusted hands. Let the foreman continue his routine, make it seem like nothing had changed. Meanwhile, she worked with the women to spread false information in town, mentions of a big cattle drive to the south pastures, hints about reduced security due to troubles with the bank. "You're devious," James said admiringly as she outlined the strategy. "Remind me never to make an enemy of you." "Too late for that," Clara said wryly. "You made me your ally instead." The trap was set for the new moon, when darkness would provide the best cover for rustlers. Clara insisted on being part of the ambush party, despite James's protests. "I can shoot," she said simply. "My father taught me when I was young. Before..." She stopped, as always, before revealing too much. "Clara?" "I won't hide in the house while you risk everything. We're partners, remember?" He capitulated, as she'd known he would. The respect between them had grown into something deeper, a recognition of equal strength, equal determination. The night of the ambush, Clara stationed herself in the barn loft with a rifle, overlooking the supposedly vulnerable herd. James and his men were hidden at strategic points, waiting. Annie was safe in the house with Rosita and 2 trusted hands standing guard. They came at midnight, 8 riders moving with the confidence of men who thought they owned the darkness. Clara recognized Martha's foreman immediately, pointing out the best animals to his companions. James let them get close, let them start cutting out cattle. Then Tom fired the signal shot. "Drop your weapons. You're surrounded." The rustlers scattered, firing wildly. Clara sighted down her rifle, picking her target carefully. Martha's foreman was fleeing toward the ravine if he escaped. They'd lose their proof of the connection. She fired once, precisely, and his horse screamed and stumbled. The man rolled clear, coming up with his gun aimed at James, who was pursuing on foot. Clara didn't think. She fired again. The foreman's gun flew from his hand as her bullet caught his wrist. He dropped, clutching the wound, cursing. The fight was brief but vicious. When it ended, 6 rustlers were captured. 1 was dead, and 1 had escaped. The foreman, wounded and facing a noose, sang like a mourning bird about Martha's involvement. "She said she'd pay us to run off the foreign woman," he gasped out. "Said if we made enough trouble, Hollis would send her away to keep the peace. When that didn't work, she said to take enough cattle to ruin him, force him to sell." Sheriff Williams, summoned from town, looked deeply uncomfortable as he took the confession. Martha Colton was the widow of a judge, a pillar of society, but the evidence was damning. The arrest of Martha Colton for conspiracy to commit cattle rustling sent shockwaves through 3 counties. She went with icy dignity, but not before shooting Clara a look of pure venom.
"This isn't over,"
she hissed as the sheriff led her away.
"I know what you are. Everyone will know."
Clara stood steady under that gaze, but inside, fear coiled like a snake. Martha had resources, connections, even from jail. She could pursue Clara's past, unearth the secrets that could destroy everything. That night, after the cattle were secured and the ranch settled into exhausted quiet, Clara found James on the porch. He was staring out at the darkness, looking older than his years. "You saved my life tonight," he said without preamble.
"That shot, where did you really learn to shoot like that?"
Clara sat beside him, drawing her shawl tight against the cool night air. "Does it matter?" "No." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Nothing matters except that you're here. But Clara, if there's something I should know, something that might hurt you or Annie." She was quiet for a long moment, weighing truth against safety. "My father was a good man who made bad choices," she said finally. "When those choices caught up to him, I had to run. I've been running ever since, until I knocked on your door. And if what you're running from finds you here, then I'll face it. I'm tired of running. James, this is my stand. Here, with you and Annie." He lifted their joined hands, pressing his lips to her knuckles. "Then we make our stand together." In the house, Annie watched from her bedroom window. She'd woken to the gunshots, terrified, but Rosita had held her tight and whispered that Papa and Miss Clara were keeping them safe. Now she saw them on the porch, holding hands in the darkness, and her 6-year-old heart swelled with satisfaction. They looked like the married folks in town, like they belonged together.
"Please, God,"
she whispered, the prayer her real mama had taught her before the fever took her away. "Please let Miss Clara stay forever. I promise I'll be good. I'll eat my vegetables and do my lessons and never talk back. Just please let her stay." On the porch, unaware of the child's fervent prayers, Clara and James sat in comfortable silence. The ranch was safe for now. The rustlers were caught, Martha's scheme exposed, but both knew this was just one battle in a larger war. "What happens now?" Clara asked. "Now we rebuild what they tried to tear down. We make the ranch stronger, and—" He paused, seeming to gather courage. "And we stop pretending that what's between us is just convenience or companionship." Clara's heart raced.
"What is it then?"
"Love," he said simply. "At least on my part. I love you, Clara. Whatever name you were born with, whatever you're running from, whoever you were before I love the woman you are now." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. No one had ever said those words to her, not with such certainty, such acceptance of all her broken pieces.
"I love you too,"
she whispered. "I love you and Annie both. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You gave me a family when I'd forgotten what that meant. You gave me the courage to stop running." He kissed her then, under the vast Texas sky, while the cattle lowed in the distance and the night wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. It was a kiss that promised tomorrow and all the tomorrows after, whatever they might bring. When they finally parted, James smiled, that rare, true smile that transformed his weathered face. "Come on, Darlin. Let's go check on our daughter." Our daughter. The words wrapped around Clara's heart like a blessing. Together they walked into the house that had become a home, ready to face whatever the morning would bring. In her bed, Annie smiled and closed her eyes, her prayer already answered in the way her papa said, "Our." The morning James asked Clara to marry him. The sky was the color of fresh cream and the air smelled of coming rain. He found her in the garden, teaching Annie to distinguish between the herbs rosemary for remembrance, sage for wisdom, thyme for courage. "Annie," he said, his voice carrying a note that made Clara look up. "Would you go help Rosita with breakfast? I need to speak with Miss Clara." Annie studied him with those two wise eyes. Are you going to ask her the important question? James's eyebrows rose. What important question? The one you practice in the mirror when you think nobody's watching? Annie grinned and scampered off before he could respond. Clara stood, brushing dirt from her apron, heart suddenly racing. James! He took her hands, heedless of the earth still clinging to them. Clara, these past months you've brought life back to this house. You've given Annie a mother's love and me. He paused, swallowing hard. You've given me hope I thought I'd buried with Elizabeth. James, let me finish. I know there are things you haven't told me, things you're still running from. I don't care. I know who you are, the woman who fights storms beside me, who stands up to the whole town for our family, who loves my daughter like her own. I know your heart, and that's all that matters. He dropped to one knee right there in the garden, pulling out a simple gold band. I can't offer you a spotless reputation or a past without pain, but I can offer you my name, my protection, and my promise to love you until my last breath. Clara, will you marry me? Clara's vision blurred with tears. James, there are things about me. I don't care. You should care. The words tumbled out, desperate. My father was convicted of embezzlement. He died in prison. My mother, she couldn't bear the shame. She took her own life. I've been running from that scandal for 3 years, changing my name, never staying anywhere long enough for the past to catch up. James was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, cupping her face in his hands. Is that all? All? Clara laughed, slightly hysterical. James, I'm the daughter of a criminal. If people knew, then they'd know you survived something that would have broken most people. They'd know you had the strength to build a new life from ashes. They'd know why you understand Annie's loss so deeply you've lost everything too. You still want to marry me knowing this? I want to marry you more. His thumbs wiped away her tears. You're not your father's crimes. Clara, you're the woman who chose to become something better. Say yes. Please say yes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and acceptance into the embrace. From the kitchen window came the sound of Annie cheering and Rosita's delighted Spanish exclamations. How long have they been watching? Clara asked, laughing against his lips. Probably since I walked out here. James grinned. We have no secrets in this house. The wedding was planned for 2 weeks hence, a simple ceremony at the ranch, with only the Hands and their families attending. Clara wanted nothing to do with the town that had judged her so harshly. And James was content to marry her in front of God and the people who truly mattered. But the past, as Clara had always feared, wasn't done with her yet. The letter arrived a week before the wedding, delivered by a special courier from San Antonio. Clara's hands shook as she recognized the legal seal. What is it? James asked, finding her frozen in his study. She handed him the letter wordlessly. It was from a law firm, informing her that her mother's sister and Aunt Clara hadn't seen since childhood had died, leaving her entire estate to Clara Marie Thornfield, also known as Clara Smith, Clara Jones, and any other names she may have adopted. $5,000. James read, astonished, and a house in Philadelphia. I can't take it, Clara said immediately. It's blood money. If I claim it, they'll know where I am. The scandal will follow. Clara, James set the letter aside and took her shoulders. This is your inheritance. Your aunt wanted you to have it. My aunt was the only one who wrote to me after Father's conviction, Clara said quietly. She said she understood why I ran, that she would have done the same. I never wrote back. I was too afraid. And now she's given you the means to never run again. James tilted her chin up. Take the money. Put it in trust for Annie if you don't want it for yourself. But don't let fear rob you of this gift. That evening, Clara made 2 decisions. First, She would claim her inheritance not for herself, but for the family she was building. Second, she would stop hiding from her past entirely. She wrote to the lawyers, providing her current location and new name soon to be Clara Hollis. Let them come, the gossips and scandalmongers. She had James's love, Annie's trust, and the loyalty of good people. That was armor enough against old shame. The town's reaction was swift and predictable. Word of Clara's inheritance and the multiple names listed spread like wildfire. But something unexpected happened. Martha Colton's arrest had shifted the balance of power. The woman who'd ruled through fear and manipulation was gone, and in her absence, other voices emerged. Mrs. Miguel Santos was the first to visit, bringing fresh tortillas and congratulations. "You make Senor James happy?" she said simply. "His little girl loves you. This is what matters." Tom's wife, Sarah, came next, then Chuck's mother, then the minister's younger daughter, who'd always chafed under Martha's rule. Each woman had a story, a kindness Clara had shown, a moment when she'd proved herself more than the gossips claimed. Martha had us all cowed, Sarah admitted. But when you stood up to her that day in church, it was like watching David face Goliath. You showed us we didn't have to be afraid anymore. The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Clara stood in the bedroom that would soon be officially hers, letting Rosita pin orange blossoms in her hair. She wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and recently altered. It had arrived from Philadelphia with the rest of her inheritance, a gift from beyond the grave. Forgiveness in silk and lace. "You are beautiful, mija," Rosita said, tears in her eyes. "Senor James, he will forget how to breathe." Annie burst in, adorable in her new yellow dress. "Oh, Mama, you look like a princess." The word Mama no longer made Clara flinch. She'd earned it through patience and love, through bedtime stories and scraped knees, through being present when it mattered. "And you look like sunshine itself," Clara said, adjusting Annie's ribbon. "Ready to help me become officially your mama?" Annie nodded solemnly. "I've been ready since you gave me water that first day. I knew you belonged with us." The ceremony was held in the garden Clara had helped bring back to life. James waited under an arch of roses, his face lighting up when he saw her. The ranch hands stood as witnesses, scrubbed clean and beaming. Even the new minister from the neighboring county, younger and less judgmental than Reverend Michaels, seemed genuinely pleased to be there. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we gather to witness the union of James and Clara, two souls who have found in each other a love worth fighting for." Clara barely heard the words. She was lost in James's eyes, in the promise she saw there. When it came time for the vows, she spoke clearly, letting her voice carry. "I promise to stand beside you through storms and sunshine, through plenty and want. I promise to love Annie as my own, to build a life worthy of the trust you've placed in me. I promise to stop running and start living, here with you, forever." James's voice was rough with emotion as he replied, "I promise to protect you, to trust you, to love you not despite your past but because it made you who you are. I promise to give you a home you'll never have to leave, a family you'll never lose, and a love that grows stronger with each passing day." "The rings?" the minister asked. Annie stepped forward proudly, carrying the simple gold bands. As Clara slipped the ring onto James's finger, she felt the last of her walls crumble. This was real. This was hers. This was home. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. James, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was sweet and deep and full of promise. Around them, the ranch hands cheered. Annie wrapped her arms around both their legs, and they lifted her into their embrace, the three of them united at last. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Rosita had outdone herself with the feast. The hands had decorated the barn with wildflowers and lanterns. Someone brought out a fiddle, and soon everyone was dancing under the stars. "No regrets?" James asked as they swayed together. Annie balanced on his hip. "None," Clara said firmly. "This is where I belong, where we belong." Later, as the party wound down, Clara found herself standing with Sarah and Maria, watching James teach Annie a complicated dance step.
"You know," Sarah said quietly,
"Martha was wrong about you. You didn't come here to take anything. You came here to give love, life, hope, things this ranch had been missing since Elizabeth died."
"I came here with nothing," Clara said.
"No," Maria corrected. "You came with everything that mattered, a good heart and willing hands. The rest," she gestured at the decorated barn, "the happy families, the man and child laughing in the lantern light. The rest you built." That night, after Annie was tucked into bed and the ranch had settled into peaceful quiet, Clara stood with her husband on the porch where they'd shared so many conversations.
"Thank you," she said softly.
"For what?"
"For seeing me, not the desperate woman at your gate, not the scandal I was running from, not what the town thought I was. For seeing me—"
James pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her hair.
"Thank you for letting yourself be seen, for trusting me with your truth, for choosing to stay." "I'll always choose to stay,"
Clara promised.
"This is my home. You and Annie are my family. Everything I was searching for, I found here."
Inside the house, Annie smiled in her sleep, dreams full of a mother who would never leave, a father who smiled again, and a home filled with laughter. On the porch, James and Clara held each other under the vast Texas sky, no longer two broken people but one strong family, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. The transformation was complete. The desperate woman who'd asked for water in the desert had become wife, mother, and the heart of a home. And James Hollis, the cowboy who'd thought his heart died with his first wife, had discovered that sometimes love comes twice different but equally true, teaching us that the human heart has infinite capacity for renewal. In the distance, a coyote called to the moon, and Clara smiled. Even the wild things were singing tonight, celebrating the triumph of love over fear, hope over despair, and the miracle of finding family in the most unexpected places. The wedding night was quiet and tender, a gentle closing of one chapter and the opening of another. Clara stood by the window of what was now truly her bedroom, brushing out her hair by moonlight. In the reflection, she saw James approach, his expression soft with wonder. "My wife," he said, as if testing the words.
"I keep thinking I'll wake up and find this was all a dream."
Clara turned, setting down the brush. "If it's a dream, it's one we're sharing, and I have no intention of waking up." He drew her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "You gave me everything I'd lost," he murmured into her hair. "Hope, laughter, love, a reason to build something lasting again."
"You gave me the same," Clara whispered. "When I knocked on your door, I was nobody, just another dusty drifter with empty hands and a broken past. You made me somebody, a wife, a mother, someone who matters."
They held each other in the lamplight, two souls who had wandered through grief and loss to find each other at last. When Annie's voice called out softly from her room, "Mama, Papa," they went to her together, sitting on either side of her bed.
"Bad dream, sweetheart?"
Clara asked, smoothing the child's hair.
"No," Annie said, reaching for both their hands. "I just wanted to make sure you were both still here. Sometimes I dream that one of you goes away like my first mama did."
"We're not going anywhere," James promised. "We're a family now, official and forever."
"Can we stay like this for a minute?"
Annie asked. "All together." So they did. The three of them connected in the quiet night, until Annie's breathing deepened into sleep. Clara and James exchanged a look over her golden head, a look that said everything about commitment, about choosing each other not just in the joy of a wedding day, but in these small, precious moments. The next morning brought the rhythms of ranch life, but with a new sweetness. Clara woke to find James had already risen to check on the cattle, but he'd left a wildflower on her pillow, a simple gesture that made her heart swell. She dressed quickly and went to start breakfast, humming as she worked. "You sound happy, Senora Hollis," Rosita observed, emphasizing the new title with satisfaction. "I am happy," Clara said, surprising herself with the simple truth of it. "Happier than I ever thought I'd have the right to be." The day unfolded with familiar tasks made new by her changed status. The ranch hands tipped their hats with extra respect, calling her Mrs. Hollis with genuine warmth. Annie shadowed her everywhere, chattering about how now they were a real family and could do family things like the other ranchers. "What kind of family things?" Clara asked, amused. "Oh, picnics, and going to church together without people whispering. And maybe," Annie bit her lip, "maybe having more children. I'd like a little brother or sister." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. That's something only God can decide, sweetheart." "Well, I'll pray about it then," Annie decided. "I prayed for a mama and got you, so I think God listens to me pretty good." That afternoon, as Clara was working on the account books, a task she'd taken over to help James a writer approached. Her heart clenched with old fear until she recognized him as one of theirs, returning from town with mail and supplies. "Letter for you, Mrs. Hollis," he said, handing over an envelope with elegant handwriting. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. It was from a cousin she hadn't heard from in years, one who'd cut ties after her father's disgrace. "Dearest Clara," it read, "word has reached us of your marriage to Mr. James Hollis of the Bar Ranch. I confess I was shocked to learn you were still, that you had survived your ordeal. Mother says I shouldn't write, but I remember the girl. You were kind, brave, always looking after the younger cousins. I'm glad you found happiness. Perhaps the West truly is a place for second chances. If you ever come to Chicago, you would be welcome in our home. Your past is your own business. Family should mean more than scandal." Clara read it twice, tears blurring her vision. Acceptance from an unexpected quarter. Proof that not everyone would forever judge her by her father's sins. "Good news?" James asked, finding her still clutching the letter. She showed him, watched his face soften with understanding. "You see, the past loses its power when you stop running from it." "I'm beginning to believe that," Clara said. As the days settled into a new rhythm, Clara found herself marveling at the simple joy of belonging. She and James moved together with increasing harmony, learning each other's rhythms. He liked his coffee strong and black at dawn, but with sugar after supper. She sang when she was happy, went quiet when worried. He had nightmares sometimes about Elizabeth's death. She had them about being cast out, sent back to the desert. They learned to comfort each other without words. A touch in the darkness, enough to say, "I'm here, you're safe, we're home." Annie bloomed under the security of having two parents who loved her. Her reading improved dramatically. Her laughter came easier, and she stopped asking quite so often if Clara was staying. The answer was written in every meal Clara cooked, every story told, every kiss goodnight. One evening, about a month after the wedding, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and rose. Annie was playing with her doll nearby, creating elaborate stories about families who stayed together forever. "I've been thinking," James said, taking Clara's hand, "about your inheritance." "What about it?" "What if we used some of it to build a real school for the ranch children and any others nearby who need it? You could teach your wonderful with Annie. It would give the community something positive to talk about instead of gossip." Clara turned to stare at him. "You do that use my money for—" "Our money," he corrected gently. "Everything I have is yours, and everything you have is mine. That's what marriage means. But yes, I think it would be a fine way to transform something painful from your past into something good for the future." "The Clara Hollis School," she said softly, trying it out, "where children learn that everyone deserves a second chance." "I was thinking more like the Annie Hollis School," James said with a grin, "since she's the one who brought us together.
Papa a school named after me? Annie had been listening. Of course. Would I be the most important student? You'd be the inspiration, Clara said, pulling the girl into her lap. The little girl who taught us all that family isn't just about blood, it's about choice. And we choose each other, every day. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A desperate woman. She'd stumbled out of the desert with nothing but the clothes on her back and a past she couldn't outrun. She'd asked for water and been given so much more shelter, work, purpose, love. James called her Darlin now, without self-consciousness, the endearment as natural as breathing. Annie called her Mama, with absolute certainty. The ranch hands called her Ma'am, with genuine respect. But more than any title, she had found herself. Not the senator's disgraced daughter, not the woman running from scandal, but Clara Hollis' wife, mother, and pillar of a growing legacy. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, noting her contemplative mood. "Beginnings," Clara said. "How sometimes what feels like an ending is really just the start of something better." "To new beginnings, then," James said, raising an imaginary glass. "To home," Clara countered. "To family," Annie added, not to be left out. They sat together as the desert night embraced them. Three hearts that had found their way to each other across loss and loneliness. In the morning, there would be work cattle to tend, meals to cook, a school to plan, a life to build. But for now, they had this perfect moment, this quiet proof that love could bloom even in the harshest ground. The Bar Ranch stood solid against the vast Texas sky. No longer just a successful cattle operation, but a true home. Its pastures had seen drought and storm, loss and renewal. Now it sheltered a love story that the gossips would tell for generations, how a desperate woman found sanctuary, how a grieving man found new love, how a lonely child found a mother. And in the garden where Clara had said yes to forever, new roses bloomed, their petals catching the moonlight like promises. The desert had tested them all, but they had proven stronger than its harsh demands. They had chosen each other, again and again, in small moments and large, and that choice, renewed daily, was the greatest miracle of all. Clara smiled, pulling her family closer. "I love you both," she said simply. "Thank you for saving me." "We saved each other," James corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We're a family," Annie said with satisfaction. "And families are forever." Under the vast canopy of stars, with the desert wind singing its ancient song, they held each other close, three souls who had found their way home. Not to a place, but to each other. And that, Clara knew, was the greatest treasure of all, not gold or cattle or land, but love that had grown from the rockiest soil, proving that even in the wilderness, hearts could find their way to where they belonged. The coyotes called in the distance, the nightbirds sang their lullabies, and the Bar Ranch settled into peaceful slumber. But on the porch, the Hollis family lingered, unwilling to let go of this perfect moment when everything they'd fought for, everything they'd hoped for, was finally, blessedly real. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. If you enjoyed Clara and James's journey, please let us know where you're listening from. We'd love to connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel From Wild West for more heartwarming tales of love, courage, and second chances on the frontier. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Did Clara's transformation touch your heart? Could you feel the dust and heat of the desert? We can't wait to hear from you. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunset of happiness.